Welcome to today's tutorial. In this hands-on guide, we'll be diving into FastAPI, which is a fast and modern web framework for building APIs with Python. It's powerful, easy to use, and incredibly efficient for building projects. Whether you're a beginner or have some experience, by the end of this video, you'll be able to build and run your first API. We'll be covering setting up the environment, installing FastAPI and Uvicorn, creating your first API endpoint, testing the API with Swagger, and finally, running the app in development mode. I'll be using VS Code, but feel free to use any IDE of your choice. As long as it supports Python, you're good to go. If you're enjoying this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome tutorials like this one. Let's get started. Before we get into the exciting world of coding with FastAPI, let's first make sure our environment is set up correctly. This is an essential step because it keeps everything organized and prevents any clashes with other projects we may have. The first thing we need to do is create a new directory for our FastAPI project. This helps keep our project files organized and isolated from other work. You can name it anything you like, but for the sake of this tutorial, let's call it FastAPI-demo. Open up your terminal and type the following. This command creates a folder named FastAPI-demo where our project files will go, while this command changes the current directory to FastAPI-demo, making it our working directory for the project. Now our terminal is ready to go. One of the best practices when working with Python is to use virtual environment. A virtual environment is a self-contained folder where all our project dependencies, that is, libraries, are stored. This ensures our FastAPI project is separated from our other projects and avoids conflicts between different package versions. Trust me, this is super helpful when you work on multiple projects at once. To create the virtual environment, run the following command. This tells Python to use its built-in venv module to create a virtual environment. This is the name of the folder where our virtual environments live. You can call it anything, but venv is a common convention. Once we hit enter, you won't see much change, but trust me, something important just happened behind the scenes. A brand new virtual environment has been created in the venv folder. Now that the environment is set up, it's time to activate it. Activating the virtual environment tells your terminal to use this isolated environment for running Python code and installing packages. We know it's activated because our terminal will display this before the command prompt. Once activated, our terminal prompt should change to something like this. This part is a clue that the environment is ready to go. You might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Well, a virtual environment helps you avoid messing with your global Python installation. It ensures that the packages you install, like FastAPI and Uvicorn, only apply to this project and won't interfere with any other Python projects we might be working on. Now we are all set up and ready to dive into coding our FastAPI app. Make sure to keep the virtual environment active for the rest of the tutorial. And if you ever close the terminal or restart your machine, just activate it again with the command above. Great! Now that we have set up our virtual environment, it's time to get the essential tools we need to bring our FastAPI app to life. In this step, we install two key components. FastAPI. This is the star of the show. It's a modern and fast Python web framework that will let us build our API endpoints. FastAPI makes it super easy to create high-performance web applications. Next, Uvicorn. Think of this as the engine that runs your FastAPI app. Uvicorn is an ASGI server that will serve your FastAPI applications to the world. It is lightweight and super efficient, which is exactly what we need to make our API fast and scalable. Let's make sure we have both of these installed in our virtual environment. Open up your terminal and run the following command. Pip install. This is Python's package installer. It's like a shopping cart for the tools and libraries we need for our projects. FastAPI. This is the web framework we're using to build the API. Uvicorn. This is the ASGI server that will run our FastAPI application. Once we hit enter, Pip will download and install both FastAPI and Uvicorn into our virtual environment. You will see the installation processes on your terminal as the packages are fetched and installed. If you're working on a larger project or collaborating with others, it's always a good idea to list the packages you're using in a required.txt file. This makes it easy for others and your future self to install the same exact packages with one single code. You can do this later once you've installed everything you need. Once the installation is complete, you will have FastAPI and Uvicorn set up and ready to go. From here, we'll move on to the fun part, building our first API endpoint and seeing it run live. Stay tuned, because now that we've got everything installed, we're officially in business. Alright, the fun part begins now. Let's create our very first API endpoint. In this step, we are going to see how easy it is to define an API route using FastAPI. We are going to build a super simple endpoint that responds with a hello world message. Let's dive in. First, go ahead and create a new file called main.py in your project directory. This is where all the magic is going to happen. Now that we have our main.py file ready, let's import FastAPI into it. FastAPI is a framework that will handle the routing and all the heavy lifting for us. Here we're importing the FastAPI class from the FastAPI package. The class is the heart and the soul of our app. It's what we'll use to set up routes, handle requests, and define our endpoints. Now let's create an instance of the FastAPI class. This instance is your application object and will be the foundation for everything in your app. Think of it like the boss of your application. It manages routes, requests, and configurations. With this line, you have just created your FastAPI application. It's like saying, okay, FastAPI, let's get started and start listening for requests. Here comes the magic. Let's create our first API endpoint. An endpoint is essentially a URL path that your API will respond to. In our case, we'll set up a simple endpoint that responds to requests made to the root URL and send back a greeting message. This is a decorator. A decorator is like a special instruction for FastAPI, telling it, hey, when someone sends a GET request to this URL, call the function. A app.get path tells FastAPI to handle GET requests at the root URL. GET requests are typically used to fetch data, in this case, a friendly message. This is a function that runs whenever someone makes a GET request to the root URL. It's the logic behind handling the request. Think of it as a waiter in a restaurant who takes an order. You define what happens when the order comes in. This line is where we return the data for the response. We'll be running a Python dictionary with a key value pair. The best part, FastAPI automatically converts this dictionary into JSON format, which is the standard for API response. So this is what your user will usually receive. When a user visits the root URL of your API, FastAPI calls the read_root function. This function will return a JSON response. You can think of this function as a handler for requests to the root endpoint. FastAPI handles everything from accepting requests, running the function, and sending the response back. Now that we've created our first endpoint, it's time to see it in action. But before we run it, let's make sure to save our file as main.py. In the next step, we will run the application and see how it works. But for now, let's take a moment to appreciate what we've just built. You've created your first API endpoint in FastAPI. This is just the beginning. In the next section, we'll dive into handling more complex routes and data. But for now, enjoy your first API. Alright, the moment we've been waiting for. Let's fire up our API and watch it come to life. This step is where we'll take everything we've built so far and make it accessible via the web. Don't worry, it's easier than you might think. In this step, we're going to run our API using Uvicorn, the ASGI server that will serve our FastAPI app. It's like putting your app on a stage ready to perform for the world. Go ahead and open up your terminal, then type the following command to start the server. This part tells Uvicorn where to find your FastAPI application. Here, main is the name of the Python file you created earlier. An app is a FastAPI instance we define inside that file. So name column app is like saying, hello Uvicorn, look inside main.py and find the FastAPI app that we called app. This flag is a game changer. It tells Uvicorn to auto-reload your application whenever you make changes to the code. So if you add a new endpoint or tweak the logic, you don't need to manually restart the server. Uvicorn does it for you automatically. This is super helpful during development when you are tweaking and testing your code. Once you hit enter, Uvicorn will start your FastAPI app and you should see output in your terminal that looks something like this. The output is a good sign your API is up and running. Here is what's going on. This message tells you that your FastAPI application is live and being served by Uvicorn at this link. This is your local server address, which you can visit using your browser. This IP is a loopback address, often referred to as localhost. This just means that your API is running on your own computer, the local environment, so only you can access it at this stage. Press Ctrl+C to quit. This is just a reminder that if you want to stop the server, you can press Ctrl+C in your terminal. Now that your server is running, let's open up your browser and head to this link. When you do, you should see a nice little greeting message like this. This means that your first endpoint is working as expected. FastAPI handled the request, ran the read_root function, and sends the response back to you. Here is a cool little bonus. FastAPI comes with interactive documentation that allows you to test your endpoints directly from the browser. So if you head to this link, you'll see a beautifully designed page where you can see your API's available routes, try out your app, and even send requests to it, all without leaving the browser. It's like a built-in API playground. If you want to dive deeper, you can also access the alternative docs at this link. This is another way to interact with your API documentation. You can think of it as having two different views of your API. Choose whichever one you like. You have just successfully launched your first FastAPI application. But don't stop here. You now have a foundation set up. As you move forward, you will learn how to handle more types of requests like posts, puts, and deletes, validate input data, work with databases, build more complex reward APIs. So for now, take a moment to bask in the glory of your first running API. You've just done it. Every time you make changes to your code, Uvicorn will automatically reload the app thanks to the reload flag. So no need to restart manually every time you edit something. This makes testing and tweaking your code super smooth. Alright, now that our API is up and running, it's time for some real-world testing. Let's make sure everything is working and see how FastAPI makes it incredibly easy to test and interact with our API. FastAPI automatically generates some amazing interactive documentation for us. This documentation is powered by Swagger UI, which makes it super easy to test our API right from the browser. No need for external tools or complex setup. It's all built in. How awesome is that? To access this documentation, simply open up your browser and navigate to this link. When you open this, you should be greeted with a clean, interactive user interface that looks something like this. This is Swagger UI in action, and it's an incredibly useful tool when you're building APIs because it lets you interact with your API in real time directly from the browser. You don't even need to write a test script or use Postman just yet. Here is the fun part. You will see that Get Endpoint is listed in the documentation. This is the endpoint we created earlier with the app.get decorator. Click on the Get Endpoint. You will see it expand, showing details of your API endpoint. This includes any parameters, descriptions, and expected response. For now, it is pretty straightforward, as it's just a simple GET request with no parameters. Click the Try It Out button. This allows you to interact with your API without having to type any code. FastAPI makes it so easy to test your endpoints interactively. After clicking Try It, hit the Execute button. This will send a request to your FastAPI app. FastAPI will process it and return a response, which will be displayed directly on the Swagger UI. After hitting Execute, the Swagger UI will display the response from your FastAPI app. You should see something like this. This is the exact response we defined in the read_root function. FastAPI automatically converts the Python directly into JSON response. Let's take a moment to appreciate how slick this is. FastAPI not only made it easy for us to build an API in just a few lines of code, but it also auto-generated this super helpful documentation that allows us to test everything directly from the browser. You didn't need to install extra tools or write special testing scripts. FastAPI took care of it all. It's like having your very own API playground where you can test, modify, and explore your API without leaving your browser. How cool is that? Testing your API this way is just the beginning. Now that you've seen how easy it is to interact with your API using Swagger UI, here are some exciting things we can do next. Add more endpoints to handle different HTTP methods. Implement request validation to ensure the data coming into your API is correct. Integrate a database to store and retrieve data from your API. Learn about more advanced features like authentication and security. But for now, sit back and enjoy the fact that you've got a live running API ready to serve the world. FastAPI has made it ridiculously easy for us to get it this far. If you want to see more tutorials like this, don't forget to hit subscribe for future updates. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next steps in your API building journey. And there you have it. You've just built your very first API using FastAPI. Here is a quick recap of what we covered. Setting up the environment with a virtual environment, installing FastAPI and Uvicorn to run the API, creating a basic endpoint that returns a message, running the app with Uvicorn and testing it in Swagger UI. I hope this tutorial was clear and helpful. FastAPI is a powerful tool, and this is just the beginning. In future videos, we'll dive deeper into more advanced topics like handling different HTTP methods, validating input data, and connecting to database. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button so you won't miss any future lessons. Keep coding, and I'll see you in the next one.